United States of America owes its origin to its founding fathers, who gave it the essence and form in which we know it today. One of the most influential founding fathers was Thomas Jefferson, admired for his promotion of the ideals of republicanism. Thomas Jefferson was the third President of the United States, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. As a political philosopher, Jefferson was a man of enlightenment. He idealized the independent middle-class farmer as exemplar of republican virtues. He distrusted cities and financiers and favored states' rights and a strictly limited federal government. Jefferson supported the separation of the church and the state and was the author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Major events during his presidency include the Louisiana Purchase, a huge expanse of territory bought from France. After acquiring Louisiana in 1803, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore a route to the Pacific Northwest and identify the boundless possibilities that existed in the American West. Thomas Jefferson was the eponym of Jeffersonian democracy and the co-founder and leader of the Democratic Republican Party, which dominated American politics for a quarter century. Jefferson served as the wartime governor of Virginia from 1779 to 1781, the first United States Secretary of State from 1789 to 1793, and the second Vice President from 1797 to 1801. Jefferson achieved distinction as, among other things, a horticulturist, statesman, architect, archaeologist, paleontologist, author, inventor, and founder of the University of Virginia. Jefferson hailed from a rich gentleman farmer family in Shadwell, Virginia. His father, Peter Jefferson, being a rich planter, owned 2,500 acres of land and 150 slaves. Unlike their contemporary southern planters, the Jefferson family was very generous to their slaves. Jefferson's family did emancipate or set their slaves free. He was a very fortunate child because he received very good education at the William and Mary's College. He was admitted in the college in 1760 and graduated in 1761. Being a serious and hard-working student, he studied mathematics, philosophy, and French. Soon after completing his education, Jefferson was drawn into the American War of Independence. Author Dumas Mellon, in his book Thomas Jefferson, a brief biography, referred to Thomas Jefferson as a gentleman justice. Professor Chittobroto Palit has described him as one of the theoreticians of the American War of Independence.
Before the American Revolution started, there was a need for Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was chosen to write that declaration because he was known to be a scholarly person who could think and write. So he wrote that memorable document known as the Declaration of Independence.
The political career of Thomas Jefferson, however, began after the War of Independence, when a government of the new nation was elected under the auspices of George Washington. In the cabinet of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson was appointed the Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton was appointed at the same time the Secretary of Treasury. The two giants under the leadership of Washington were groomed to become the two greatest leaders of the United States of America and imparted to America its separate identity.
Jefferson had a pivotal role to play in the formation of the party system in America. It all started in the Washington cabinet itself. Washington was in the habit of having joint meetings of all his ministers. Jefferson could speak on financial matters, on forms of government, on foreign policy, on westward movement, on many other things, and similarly, Alexander Hamilton could also speak on subjects pertaining to, particularly on foreign policy. There were these controversies, and we find that both these leaders, who were both brilliant, had a number of issues over which they fell out. I just enumerate the issues. On forms of government, Alexander Hamilton wanted to have more power for the center, more federal control, whereas Jefferson still would maintain preservation of state rights. On matters of finance, Jefferson would try to minimize the role of the Bank of United States, role of tariff and also taxes, the excise duties on liquor, etc., and Hamilton vice versa. And finally, on foreign policy, they fell out badly. Jefferson was decidedly pro-French, whereas Hamilton was pro-British. And these questions cropped up frequently during those days. And finally, there was a point of no return. As a consequence, two parties were born. Jefferson headed the Democratic Republican Party, and Alexander Hamilton founded the Federalist Party. And two-party system in America came to existence. And on this party ticket of Democratic Republicans, Jefferson was elected third President of the United States.
Thomas Jefferson was the President of the United States for 2 terms consecutively. During his first presidency between 1801 and 1805, he tackled mainly domestic problems competently.
But more than competence, what was important to Jefferson was to send out a message that the revolution was being recovered, that power was being given back to the American people. Under the presidency of George Washington and John Adams thereafter, there had been an attempt to concentrate a degree of authority in Washington, whether financially or politically. The attempt had been made. This Jefferson wished to once and for all reverse. He wished to give power back to Congress. He wished to give power back to the states. In the course of the first presidency, as a result, Jefferson attempted to undermine the authority of the judiciary and undermine the authority of the presidency which he himself occupied, to introduce greater and greater methods whereby Congress itself would involve its own members in the running of government. This, he hoped, would give democracy a new dimension in American politics, a new position.
The first presidency was more important in the sense that he really carried out a lot of radical reforms in the domestic sector.
Randolph, colleague of Thomas Jefferson, summarized the first presidency of Jefferson by saying, "No other administration was more brilliant than that of Mr. Jefferson. We are indeed in the full tide of successful experiments, taxes repelled, public debt amply provided for both principal and interest, Louisiana Accord, sinecures abolished, public confidence unbounded."
So there are 5 things which Randolph had summarized for Jefferson. Let us examine whether he really achieved them or not. His Secretary of Treasury, Albert Gallatin, reduced tax burden on people from $83 million to $45 million. There's a huge tax cut without fail. Then further we see that one particular tax, that was the tax on whiskey, liquor, that was altogether repealed by Jefferson administration. It caused a considerable loss of revenue. But we know during George Washington's time, because of this tax on whiskey or liquor, there was a whiskey rebellion. Therefore, to tackle that situation, Jefferson had to repeal the tax on liquor. He sent a proposal to purchase Louisiana, which contained the valuable port of New Orleans. That was the only navigable port in the south to the sea. Now, it was quite far off for Napoleon. Napoleon was at that time toying with the idea of going to Egypt rather than retain any kind of foothold in the New World. And therefore, there was a lot of bargain, and in the final bargain, he agreed to sell Louisiana to the United States at 60 million francs. It is a very good price. French coffers naturally puffed up, but United States also gained considerably from the purchase of Louisiana. Apart from getting this ice-free port of New Orleans, a lot of arable territory was added to the Republic. He got a boost to his party because of the purchase of Louisiana, for which he was immensely popular in the United States.
Surprisingly, the popularity was not something that he himself anticipated. Jefferson was uncertain about the Louisiana purchase, not because he did not think it was necessary, but because he was not certain whether constitutionally he should undertake such a matter. The purchase itself, though, as we know, was important not simply because it gave the United States the port of New Orleans and therefore control of the Mississippi. Far, far important, it actually doubled the actual land area that was covered by the American government and by the United States as an entity. The area that was handed over by Napoleon for the paltry sum of some 15 million pounds was ultimately to form some 6 states within the matter of 10 years.
He abolished many unnecessary posts as frills of the government. He would do with minimum staff and carry out maximum work. And therefore, there was considerable pruning was done in the administration. A lot of parasitic posts were simply abolished during his time. So that's the way, that was one way of saving revenue, which he did. So Jefferson kept his word, and finally what Randolph says, his public confidence was unbounded. Public rejoiced in whatever he did because he was in tune with the contemporary American people. Not so much Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was a man of the future. Hamilton would be the prophet of industrial America after the Civil War. He was born much before his time, whereas Jefferson was valid with his parochial doctrine of agrarian democracy. So he was a man of his times. He was really a child of his times, and therefore he was immensely popular, and there was no hesitation in the minds of the people to re-elect him as the president for the second term between 1805 and 1809. In the second term of office, he was preoccupied with foreign policy. There was an Anglo-French rivalry in the continent, in the wide world. Against that, the baby republic had to struggle and find its feet. Naturally, we see that Jefferson got embroiled in foreign policy matters in the second term. To tackle that problem, Jefferson developed a military academy at West Point, where he would have 25,000 strong army ready all the time, and he would have some 7,000 warships also ready for any kind of battle with England. He got ready for any kind of eventuality because he thought that there could be a battle, because America was not that powerful. The French were staying aloof. If the British really invaded, then America had to fend for herself. So militarily he equipped the country during this tenure, and Since then, a lot of problem was cropping up, like the question of impressment. Impressment, typical question. It means that on mid-sea, many American ships were caught by the British ships and looted, and many of the sailors, American sailors, were actually arrested and taken prisoner by the British ships. And that is a matter of national dishonor for which he had to fight. He had to fight and protest. In this thumbnail version of his background, we can say that Jefferson, after these terms, became a recluse, went back to his palace at Monticello and kept himself busy with various kinds of inventions. Particularly, he was very fond of making clocks. I have visited Monticello myself and had seen that there are so many clocks which were actually invented by Thomas Jefferson, and various other knickknacks. That's how he passed time before he finally passed away.
The ideologies of Jefferson can best be discerned from his life works. His notes on State of Virginia, which he wrote as the Governor of Virginia, and the Declaration of Independence definitely need to be assessed in this connection. In Notes on State of Virginia, he highlighted his major democratic perceptions concerning individualism, natural and inalienable rights of men, states' rights, education for all, and agrarian democracy.
In these notes, Jefferson clearly outlines certain things, such as he puts his emphasis on natural rights of men, which is, we know, a refrain in all his writings, natural rights of men. At the same time, he is trying to emphasize on individualism of men, individual flowering of men. He is also talking about state rights, how states could also shape man's destiny. He is also talking about agriculture. He considers that agriculture makes a stable society, and agriculture was the future of America, where he differed with Alexander Hamilton badly, but that was his penchant, because they were landowners themselves, and at that time not much industry was seen. So contemporarily he was a child of his times, and he emphasized on agriculture, expansion of agriculture, taming of the wild west, bringing more land to under the plow, etc. That was his penchant. And the other thing in that Notes of Virginia was his emphasis on democracy. By democracy here, it was the elitist democracy, those who are more or less propertied. This is a phrase which was used by R.E. Brown in connection with the making of the Constitution. In America, if you leave out the blacks, the red Indians, and the poor whites, all other people were more or less propertied. So he addressed everything to this class. And Virginia was the nursery of all his ideas, and the administration that is set up also was like that. And agrarian democracy got a fair trial before he became president in his constituency of Virginia. And one more thing he added to it, he thought that democracy would be safe if education was promoted, higher education was promoted, because that is part and parcel of the success of democracy. People had to be educated. We know that John Stuart Mill, when he wrote his on representative government, he also said that education was the part and parcel of democracy, watchword of democracy. He also believed in that. And therefore, he was the father of the famous University of Virginia. University of Virginia, I have also visited and I lectured there. And I find it's a wonderful university. It is all made by Jefferson. He created that kind of a serene atmosphere in the University of Virginia, where they could talk about rights of man. So that was very important. And he thought that if this kind of education could be imparted through universities, then democracy would be a sure success, and all other things would be a success, be it radical idea, be it physiocratic idea. Basically, he was a physiocratic man because he always tied up with agriculture.
Next is the key document, the Declaration of Independence. Its lines are still memorized even by the school children in America. We hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that life, liberty and pursuit of happiness are inalienable natural rights of man.
Great words indeed, and so soul-stirring they are, these words. And you will notice that here also life, that means a life which should be enjoyable, not all kinds of life. Life here means enjoyable life. His own life was very much sheltered. He wanted that sheltered life to be shared by the rest of his folks. So life was very important to him. Liberty, he died for liberty. And we would say that liberty, this fierce sense of liberty, he had imbibed from the French Revolution. And because, in the French Revolution also, life, liberty, property, these were the three slogans. So he picked up liberty from them, particularly from the famous social contract theories, or the leaders of the French Revolution like Mirabeau, Marat, Danton, Robespierre. He picked up the idea from them as well. And the influence of Thomas Paine can also be noticed here, who was an American but imbued with French influence. He uses the word pursuit of happiness. Now, that is a copy from John Locke's second treatise on government, no doubt about that. Pursuit of happiness is a happier word to me than simply property. Property sounds very crude, whereas pursuit of happiness could be many things. It's a many splendid things, a rainbow. Well, you may be happy with many other things than property. So he kept the scope open to the American people to be happy. And in that kind of sylvan surrounding, one could even think that small is beautiful. One could think that life of simplicity was essential for happiness. Not always property and being propertied. That was Alexander Hamilton's goal, but not Jefferson's. He wanted that kind of a placid, serene life, less ambition, more commonplace existence. He was such a rich man, but if you see his pictures, there are some books where his pictures are given. He was a picture of simplicity. He could have multiplied his property, but he did not, because he basically believed in pursuit of happiness and not pursuit of property. That was a British vice, property, which he avoided from John Locke, and went over to pursuit of happiness, more from Rousseau.
So that is the second document, a very important document to understand Thomas Jefferson. Carl Becker has applauded that nobody could have painted such a beautiful document. It is one of man's treasures, a human treasure of the world. It is written in such inimitable prose that only Jefferson could write.
The quick estimate that I would like to make of Jefferson is that he still remains one of the greatest presidents of the United States. He was undoubtedly the founding father of the American Republic. Without his ideas, without his construction of the government, the American Republic wouldn't have survived. And particularly the democratic republican trend in America, the American political tradition, and the men who made it, the title of the book of Rothschild Hofstadter gives him high kudos for making this constitution work. And therefore he remains a Democrat, whatever his family background, whatever his property, whatever his slaves. With all his moles and words, Ultimately, he comes unscathed as one of the finest democrats of the world.
Undoubtedly, the politics of the Jeffersonian era were very democratic in a very general 18th century sense. But we have to remember, there was no room in this politics for large tiers of society. The slaves have been mentioned, but we should also remember there was no room in the politics for women, and there was certainly no room in that politics for Native Americans. Jefferson, as most American Democrats of that era, was remarkably hostile to Native Americans who really formed the dominant population of the United States at that time. They considered this population would have to gradually adjust to their way of life, that they have to sell their land to the government of the United States, and that gradually the white settler would set the tone of the future. In this sense, the democracy we are talking about was a democracy which was one that existed in spirit rather than in fact.